I want to start by saying something that most of my colleagues won't say out loud, even though every single one of them is thinking it. We were wrong about him. Not slightly wrong, not off by a degree or two in our calculations. We were wrong in the deep, foundational way that makes you go back and reread every assumption you've built a career on. That kind of wrong. His name was Cale Rourke. He was 31 years old, from a coastal city on Earth called Galway, which, I later learned, is a place on the western edge of a large island nation on the planet's northwestern continent. He had dark hair that was never quite cooperating with gravity. He had a scar on his left hand from what he described as, and I am quoting directly from his intake interview, an argument with a fishing hook when I was 9 that I definitely started. He stood at 1.8 meters tall, which is approximately average for a human male, and he was what the Velkathari cultural observers described in their pre-incident report as physically unimpressive for a diplomatic specimen. I have read that report 47 times since the incident. It brings me great personal satisfaction every single time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to the beginning. Let me tell you about the Obsidian Court, and about Empress Velarin Thascori, and about what happened on the 43rd day of the Galactic Union's first formal diplomatic visit to the Velkathari throne world, because that day changed things. Not a little, not quietly. Everything. The Velkathari are tall. I want to establish that right away because it matters for context. The shortest adult Velkathari I have ever encountered stood at 2.6 meters, and she was considered petite by her own people's standards. Their average is closer to 3 meters. They are bipedal, distantly mammalian by some stretch of xenobiology, but the similarities to humanity end approximately there. They have 4 arms, 2 primary, 2 secondary, and their skin is a deep, bioluminescent indigo that pulses faintly when they feel strong emotion. Their faces are angular and long, with high cheekbones that you'd almost call elegant if they weren't framed by a pair of secondary eye ridges that give every Velkathari a permanent expression of patrician disapproval. They have ruled 22 star systems for 4,000 years. They are not accustomed to being surprised. I had been assigned to the diplomatic mission as Cultural Documentation Officer, which is a title that sounds important but essentially means I sat in the back of rooms and wrote down everything I saw with as much precision as I could manage. I am good at this. I have been doing it for 16 years. I have documented first contact meetings, trade negotiations, territorial disputes, and one extremely complicated situation involving the Shreth Merchants Guild and a misunderstanding about what the word loan means in 3 different species languages. I thought I had seen everything. The Velkathari throne world, Velkathari Prime. They do not consider self-referential naming a mark of vanity. They consider it a mark of accuracy, is a planet of extraordinary violence and extraordinary beauty, and these 2 qualities exist in such perfect harmony that it takes about 48 hours of living there before you stop noticing the contrast. The sky is a deep amber during what they call the first light and a bruised purple during the long dark, and the architecture of the Obsidian Court is built from a volcanic glass that catches both light cycles differently. So the palace looks like fire in the morning and shadow at night. It is one of the most beautiful things I have ever seen. It is also, functionally, a fortress designed to make visitors feel small. The Velkathari know exactly what they're doing. Every measurement of that palace, every corridor width, every ceiling height, every angle of every staircase is engineered to remind non-Velkathari beings that they are guests in a place built for giants. Human diplomats had to take special lifts to reach doors designed for a species half again their height. The conference tables were built at a level that left human delegates' eyes approximately at tabletop height when seated, so that every discussion happened with Velkathari looking slightly down and humans looking slightly up. This was not accidental. Our diplomatic team had been briefed on this. The Union's Velkathari cultural liaison, a soft-spoken Drenathi named Sewell who had spent 20 years studying the species, and still referred to them with the careful respect of someone who knows they are standing near something that could kill them, had spent 3 weeks preparing the team for the psychological architecture of the court. Cale Rourke had listened to all of these briefings. He had nodded attentively. He had taken notes. And then, on the first morning in the Obsidian Court, when a Velkathari court herald had stopped our entire group in the entrance corridor and spent 4 minutes reciting the formal titles of Empress Velarin Thascori, and there were a lot of titles, the shortest of which was Sovereign of the Deep Amber Sky, Cale had leaned slightly toward me and whispered, barely a breath, "She's going to be a lot of fun, isn't she?" It was not a question. I had looked at him sideways. He had been looking straight ahead, expression perfectly neutral, eyes just faintly amused. I had thought at the time that he was nervous and covering it with humor. I know now that I had it completely backwards. Second testimony, Ambassador Delegate Pren Vezali, Drenathi Union Liaison. Recorded 2 cycles post-incident. Location, Obsidian Court Diplomatic Wing. I have been a diplomat for 38 years. I have worked with humans for 11 of those years, since their integration into the Galactic Union, and I want to be very clear about something. I like humans. I genuinely do. They are chaotic and loud, and they eat things that would hospitalize most species, and they have a remarkable tendency to make jokes in situations where every other species in the room is experiencing genuine existential dread. And I find all of this charming in the way that one finds a very fast river charming, wonderful to look at, concerning to be near. Cale Rourke was selected for this mission because he was a conflict resolution specialist. This is a human designation that does not translate cleanly into any other species' language, which should have told us something. The closest standard galactic equivalent is someone who is very good at making hostile situations less hostile, but that doesn't capture it. It doesn't capture what Cale actually was. I had read his file before the mission. I had read it 3 times because some of the incident reports attached to it seemed implausible. He had been part of 7 prior first contact or difficult diplomacy situations. In 6 of them, the situations had resolved without violence. In the 7th, the Keth Station incident, which I am sure some of you are aware of, there had been violence, but Cale had not been the one to initiate it, and the resolution, while complicated, had still technically counted as a diplomatic success by most metrics. The Union's assessment of him was, effective, unconventional, monitor closely. I thought when I first read that unconventional was the diplomatic way of writing difficult to manage. I was not wrong exactly, but I had the wrong idea of what kind of difficult. The Velkathari Empress, Velarin Thascori, had agreed to the diplomatic mission under what I can only describe as tolerant skepticism. The Velkathari had been aware of the Galactic Union for approximately 60 years. They had declined formal membership 4 times. They maintained trade relationships with 6 Union species on a bilateral basis. They had decided this was acceptable, but they were deeply, historically uninterested in the concept of collective governance. The reason for this, as best as our cultural scholars could determine, was that the Velkathari had a specific philosophical framework around strength, not aggression. They were careful to distinguish between the two. Strength, in Velkathari culture, is the capacity to protect what you love. Aggression is the capacity to take what you want. They considered the former the only legitimate basis for authority, and the latter a mark of weakness dressed in violence's clothing. By their framework, the Galactic Union, a collection of species governing by consensus and mutual agreement, was a gathering of beings who had decided to share strength because none of them had enough individually. This was not, in the Velkathari view, inspiring. Empress Velarin had agreed to receive the diplomatic mission primarily because the Union had recently made contact with a species called the Veth, a militarized empire in the outer systems that the Velkathari considered a genuine threat, and she was, by intelligence assessment, considering whether Union membership might be tactically useful. She was not going to make it easy. The Velkathari concept of evaluating potential allies involves what they call the Kethvaral. I am going to translate this imprecisely but usefully as the proving. Any individual or group seeking significant standing with the Velkathari, whether in trade, alliance, or personal relationship, must demonstrate worth through it. The specific form of the proving depends on context. For a trade partner, it might be a demonstration of product quality under stress. For a political ally, it might be a strategic scenario test. For a diplomatic mission that was, at its heart, asking the Velkathari to accept the Galactic Union as a legitimate governing body worth joining. Well, I was not surprised when Empress Velarin announced, on the 43rd day of our visit, that she wished to conduct the Kethvaral. I was surprised by the form she chose. Third testimony, Lieutenant Commander Esha Breath, Union Security Escort, Human Galway Division Secondment. Recorded 3 cycles post-incident. Location, Mobile Station Heron's Reach. I'm going to be real with you because the official record is going to be full of diplomatic language, and I spent 12 years in the Union Marines before I took the security escort position, so I've lost most of my patience for diplomatic language. The Velkathari Guard is not a normal military force. I want to make sure that's understood. Every culture in the known galaxy has warriors. Every species that has survived long enough to reach space has done so through some combination of intelligence and capacity for violence, and most of them have formalized that capacity into something that looks like a military. I have seen a lot of militaries. I have been part of one for most of my adult life. The Velkathari Guard is different. They don't recruit by conscription or by incentive. They select. From birth, Velkathari children are assessed not just for physical capacity, though that matters, but for something their culture calls Velthrin, which I'd translate as the will that does not move. It's a quality, a particular kind of stillness in a person that indicates they will not break under pressure. Not stubbornness. Stubborn people break eventually, they just make noise about it. Velthrin is something else. It's the quality of a stone, not a wall. The children who have Velthrin in sufficient measure are identified early and given to the Guard Academy. This is considered an honor, not a hardship. The families of Guard members receive elevated social standing, and the children themselves are raised in a tradition that most Velkathari consider the closest thing to sacred that their culture recognizes. The training lasts 14 years. 14 years of progressive conditioning. Physical, psychological, strategic, combat training in 47 documented disciplines, plus whatever innovations each cohort develops themselves as part of their final year assessment. The Velkathari Guard that stood in the Obsidian Court on the 43rd day of our diplomatic visit were not the product of a military. They were the product of a philosophy made physical. There were 12 of them. I know that number is what's going to seem small to people reading this later. 12. People are going to say, surely the spectacle was about more than 12 opponents. Let me be very clear about something. I am a trained Union Marine combat specialist. I have been in combat situations on 3 planets and 2 orbital stations. I have a service record that, I'm not being vain here, I'm establishing context, is considered above average by Marine standards. I looked at those 12 Velkathari guards standing in formation in the Obsidian Throne Room, and my professional assessment was, this is not a fight. This is a demonstration of how quickly a human being can be incapacitated by beings twice their height who have trained for 14 years and are the selected elite of a 4,000-year warrior culture. I was not hoping Kale would win. I was hoping he would survive with dignity. Part 2, The Declaration. Fourth Testimony, Archivist Thessaly Orvin continuing. The throne room of the Obsidian Court is shaped like a crescent. I don't know if that's architectural tradition or symbolic. Sewell, our cultural liaison, thought it was both. But the effect is that anyone standing at the center of the room is surrounded on three sides by rising tiers of black glass seating, and the fourth side opens toward the Empress's throne, which is elevated on a dais of 7 steps. The Empress was there when we were led in. I need to describe Velarin Thascori, because she matters to this story in ways that aren't only political. She is remarkable. She stood nearly 3.2 meters, tall even by Velkathari standards, and her bioluminescence was the deep, steady indigo of calm water in deep ocean. She wore the formal regalia of the Empress, layers of what appeared to be black volcanic glass woven somehow into fabric, catching light at angles that shouldn't have been possible, and her 4 arms were crossed in the specific configuration that Sewell had told us meant evaluating. Her secondary eye ridges were set in an expression that I can only describe as intelligent skepticism. She had been reviewing us for 43 days. Every diplomatic session, every cultural exchange, every meal taken in formal context under the eyes of her court observers, she had been watching, assessing, running the Velkathari calculation of worth. I had been watching her watch us, which is my job, and my assessment after 43 days was that she had reached some kind of conclusion. I didn't know what the conclusion was, but the quality of her attention had shifted. It had gone from broad observation to focused study, and the focus, increasingly, had been on Kale. This had made our mission chief, a veteran diplomat named Counselor Frendasso, a Galthani, 300 years old, who had seen more negotiations than I have had meals, visibly nervous. The Velkathari cultural observers had filed 3 separate reports in the last 2 weeks noting that the Empress's attention had fixed on the human delegate in ways that fell outside normal diplomatic evaluation parameters. I had read those reports. I had tried to talk to Kale about them. "She's watching you," I'd said, as diplomatically as I could. "I know," he'd said. "The cultural observers think it might be significant." "It is," he'd said. "That doesn't concern you." He'd looked at me then, direct, calm, with that faint expression that I kept misidentifying as amusement and I was slowly realizing something else, something quieter. "Should it?" he'd asked. I hadn't had an answer for that. The Empress spoke when we had all taken our places. The court herald translated simultaneously. The Velkathari considered it beneath the dignity of the throne to wait for translation lag, so they maintained a corps of heralds specifically for this purpose. 43 cycles, she said. "In these 43 cycles I have observed your gathering, I have heard your arguments, I have considered your proposals." A pause. The bioluminescence in her skin shifted slightly, briefly, to something warmer, not quite gold, something adjacent to it, and I have reached a preliminary conclusion. Counselor Dasso sat forward very slightly. This was, by diplomatic standards, an electric moment. A preliminary conclusion from the Velkathari Empress after 43 days could be the opening of genuine alliance negotiation. Everything we'd come here for was hinging on the next words. "Your union," she said, "has merit in concept, a gathering of species working toward collective security and shared prosperity. In concept, this has worth." Another pause, longer this time. "But concepts are not worth. Worth must be demonstrated. The Kethvarel must be satisfied." And here is where it got complicated. Because the Velkathari Kethvarel in its political form traditionally involves a demonstration by the seeking party of their capacity for strength, not dominance, not aggression, but the genuine, living quality of Velthrin, of the will that does not move. In historical practice, this had been done in many ways. Trade parties had demonstrated the quality of their goods under stress tests. Political allies had demonstrated strategic thinking in simulated conflict scenarios. But Empress Velarin Thascori looked down from her throne at the assembled diplomatic mission of the Galactic Union, and she said, "The proving I require is personal." There was a silence. "I have observed each member of this delegation. I have formed assessments of them all." Her gaze moved. "I tracked it as it moved. It settled with the precision of something that has already decided on Kael Rourke. But it is this one," she said, "to whom I address the Kethvarel." Kael, to his credit, did not look startled. He looked, and I was watching him closely, like someone who had been waiting for a thing he'd heard coming from a long way away. He stood a little straighter. That was all. "You," the Empress said, "the human conflict resolver. I have observed you for 43 cycles. You are not what your delegation presents itself as. You are not decorative strength. You are something else." A pause. "I wish to know what." Sewell, the cultural liaison, had gone very still beside me. I could see their secondary hands gripping the edge of the diplomatic table hard enough to whiten the knuckles. "The Kethvarel I offer," the Empress continued, "is this, my guard. 12 of the finest warriors this court has produced in 4 generations. They will face you, one after the other, in the proving circle. If you cannot defeat them, all 12, the diplomatic mission of the Galactic Union will be thanked for its time and respectfully dismissed. We will speak no further of alliance." Another silence. "Longer this time." "And if I do defeat them?" Kael asked. His voice was level. Not loud, but the room was quiet enough that it carried. The court herald didn't even need to translate. The Empress had clearly been waiting for this exact question. The bioluminescence in her skin shifted again. That almost gold, warmer now. "Then," Empress Velarin Thascori said, in a tone that managed to be simultaneously regal, formal, "and I am not imagining this. 6 other witnesses reported the same thing, the faintest shade of something personal. Defeat my entire guard and I'll be yours. And through you, this union of yours, which you apparently represent, will have whatever alliance you came here seeking." She paused. "And more," she added. "And then, because in that moment the universe is either fair, or it has a very specific sense of comedic timing." Kael Rourke looked up at the Empress of 22 star systems, who had just offered him herself as a prize if he could survive her 12 finest warriors, and he smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not a bravado smile. Just a smile. Small, genuine, like something he'd been sitting on for 43 days had finally arrived. "All right," he said. That was it. "All right." Counselor Dasso made a sound I can only describe as the diplomatic equivalent of someone watching a disaster unfold in slow motion from behind glass. "Fifth testimony, Court Herald Velseth, Obsidian Court, first voice. Recorded 6 cycles post-incident. Location, Obsidian Court Diplomatic Wing. Note, Velseth speaks in formal high tongue. This translation uses approximately 73% fidelity to the original. Some nuance of the Velkathari formal register is not recoverable in standard galactic common. I have been court herald for 21 years. I have translated the words of 3 empresses and the formal declarations of 42 state events. I have performed translations in conditions of political tension, personal conflict, and once, during the 3rd succession question, in conditions of genuine danger to my own life. I have never mistranslated. I want to state this clearly because what I am about to say happened, and it is embarrassing, and I am a professional. When the Empress declared the terms of the Kethvarel, I translated them correctly and precisely. When the human said, "All right," and I do not know what I expected him to say, something formal, something diplomatic, something that would at minimum acknowledge the magnitude of what had been proposed, I translated it correctly. And then I could not, for approximately 3 full seconds, find any words to say. This has never happened to me. The sound that filled those 3 seconds was the sound of 40 Velkathari court members processing a human saying one word in response to an offer that had, in its 6 prior uses in Velkathari history, caused 3 individuals to faint, one to attempt an immediate retreat, and one to propose a counteroffer so elaborate that it took 9 cycles to decode. The human said, "All right," and smiled. I want to record for the archive that his smile was, and I am aware this is not a standard observation for a formal court translation record, somewhat infuriating. Not because it was arrogant. Because it was not. Arrogance, I know. I have translated arrogance for 21 years. Arrogance has a specific quality. It is a thing performing confidence, hoping to be believed. What I saw on this human's face was not a performance. It was the Velkathari word I want to use is Velkath, which means the stillness before the river meets the sea. The knowledge of something inevitable, met without resistance or desperation, simply met. I had never seen it on a non-Velkathari face before. I translated his one word. I observed the Empress watching him. I observed the Empress's bioluminescence. I have been translating Velkathari bioluminescence for 21 years. I know what every pattern means. I will include my observation in the record. In the moment after the human smiled, Empress Velarin Thascori's bioluminescence shifted into the pattern called Velthasrin. The closest translation I can offer is the recognition of something you did not know you had been looking for. I have seen this pattern 3 times in 21 years. I have never seen it happen this quickly. Part 3, Before the Circle. 6th Testimony, Archivist Thessaly Orvin continuing. They gave us 2 cycles to prepare. This was, as Sewell explained with the careful calm of someone reciting information while internally screaming, actually a significant courtesy. Traditional Velkathari Kethveral protocol gave no preparation time. The proving was announced and immediately conducted. The 2-cycle window was an accommodation, a significant one. Sewell thought this was encouraging. I thought it meant the Empress had considered that we might need time to talk Kale out of it. We could not talk Kale out of it. I want to be very clear about this. We tried. Counselor Dasso tried. Sewell tried. Lieutenant Commander Breath tried, and her try was the most direct. She sat across from him in the small diplomatic briefing room we'd been given, and she said, "Kale, I need you to hear me. I have seen the guard. You cannot win this. I am telling you this as a professional assessment, and I am telling you this as someone who does not want to file the casualty report." Kale had listened to all of this. He'd listened to the counselor's formal concerns, and Sewell's cultural contextualization, and Esha's blunt assessment. He'd sat there the whole time with his hands loose on the table, and his expression attentive, and something in his eyes that I couldn't name yet. When we were done, he said, "Is everyone finished?" Dasso said, "The mission cannot continue if our delegate is seriously injured or killed. The political fallout alone." "Counselor," Kale said, and there was something in his voice that made even Dasso stop. Not authority or not only authority, something quieter than authority, certainty. "I'm not going to be killed." "You don't know that," Breath said. "I know it well enough," he said. "The guard has been training for 14 years each," Breath pushed back. "The shortest one is 2.7 meters tall. There are 12 of them. You are no offense." "One human from Galway," he agreed. "Yes, I know, that quiet. I know what I am, Esha, that's the point." She stared at him. "The Empress knows it too," he added. "That's why she offered this specific proving." I saw Sewell's ears, the Drenathi equivalent of an eyebrow raise, go up at that. "You think she expects you to win?" Sewell asked. Kale looked at Sewell then, and I caught something in his expression that I'd been trying to identify for 43 days, and suddenly, just for a second, I could see it clearly. It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't certainty. It was respect. I think she doesn't know yet, he said. And I think she genuinely wants to find out. He spent the remaining 2 cycles doing nothing that any of us expected. He didn't train. He didn't review combat files, though Breath had compiled a full dossier on every guard member whose fight footage she could access. He didn't do the physical preparation rituals that the Union Combat Psych team recommended for high-stress engagement scenarios. He walked. Specifically, he walked through the sections of the Obsidian Court that were open to diplomatic guests. He walked through the observatory wing, where the amber sky of Velkathari Prime was visible through long windows of something clearer than glass. He walked through the memorial corridor, where 4,000 years of Velkathari history was recorded in carved volcanic rock, battles and losses, and the names of the fallen, carved with the careful love of a culture that considers remembering the dead to be among the highest obligations of the living. I know this because I followed him. Not entirely professionally. I was curious. I am a documentarian. Curiosity is both my vice and my skill. He spent a long time in the memorial corridor, long enough that I started to wonder what he was seeing in those carvings that was worth this much time. I walked up beside him at one point, not intrusively, just within conversation range, and he said, without looking at me, "This culture has been mourning its warriors for 4,000 years. Yes, I said. Still standing, he said. Yes. That's not nothing, he said, and he said it with a kind of weight, the way you'd say something that matters, not an observation, a recognition. I wrote it down. I write everything down, it's my job. But I wrote that one down twice. 7th Testimony, Guard Commander Velthrain, 1st Sword, Obsidian Court Guard. Recorded 5 cycles post-incident. Location, Obsidian Court Guard Barracks lower level. Translation note: Velthrain initially declined to be recorded. This testimony was eventually given at the Guard Commander's own request, 5 cycles after the incident. The request noted, quote, "The record should be accurate. I will say what I said to my guard when the Empress announced the Kethveral. I said, do not underestimate it. I called him it because in the Velkathari conceptual framework for the Kethveral, the proving partner is not a person during the proving, they are a demonstration, a test made flesh. You do not defeat a person in the Kethveral. You perform strength for the Empress, and the proving partner is the means by which that performance is measured. I use the past tense intentionally. That framing was incorrect. I had reviewed what information the Union's diplomatic files contained about Kale work. The files were not comprehensive. The Union does not, as a rule, include detailed combat capability documentation in the publicly shared personnel profiles of diplomatic staff. I found this suspicious at the time. I understand it now as something different. It is not that the Union withholds such information deliberately. It is that such information, about a being like this, does not translate into the formats that files are designed to hold. What I knew, he was a conflict resolution specialist. He had a service record that included 7 significant engagements. His physical profile was unremarkable by human standards and deeply unimpressive by ours. What I assessed, a being I could incapacitate with a single arm if it came to that, which it would. I assigned the order of the guard for the proving. I placed my most technically skilled fighter, Velkara, first, not to end it quickly, but to demonstrate range. I wanted the human to see, in the first bout, the quality of what he faced. I placed myself last. Not as a mercy, because the Kethveral requires the proving partner to face escalating challenge, and I am the most formidable fighter in the court guard. That is not ego, it is a factual assessment maintained through rigorous evaluation. I have held the rank of First Sword for 9 years. I stood in the guard room before the proving and I watched my 12 warriors prepare, and I thought, this will be concluded quickly. We will be respectful. We will not cause permanent damage. The human will demonstrate whatever quality the Empress has identified in it, even in defeat, and that will be the proving. I was wrong about everything except the last part. The human did demonstrate a quality. I was wrong about what the quality was. Part 4, The Proving Circle. Eighth Testimony, Archivist Thessaly Orvin continuing. The Proving Circle is in the lower level of the Obsidian Court, below the throne room. We were taken there by a route that I think was designed to reinforce the psychological architecture. You descended through increasingly narrow corridors, the walls pressing closer, the ceiling lowering, and then you stepped through a single arch, and the space opened again into something vast. The circle itself was exactly what the name suggested. A circular space, perhaps 40 meters across, with a floor of the same black volcanic glass as everything else in the court. The walls curved up and outward like the inside of a bowl, and they were lined with the same tiered seating as the throne room above, but fuller, much fuller. The court had gathered. Not just the regular court members who attended diplomatic sessions. The lower-level guard corps, off-duty, administrative staff, what I could only interpret as civilians, Velkathari who had come from somewhere beyond the palace itself. Hundreds of them, filling those curved tiers, their bioluminescence creating a wash of indigo light that shifted as they shifted, a living aurora up those walls. I have been in large crowds before. I have felt the pressure of collective attention. I have never felt it quite like this. There were, carved above the arch we'd entered through, words in High Velkathari that Sewell translated quietly into my ear as, "Strength is not what you have. Strength is what you refuse to lose." I thought about that while I found my seat in the diplomatic observation tier. The guard filed in from the opposite side. They moved the way all Velkathari warriors move, with an unhurried precision that covers how fast they actually are. You watch them walk and you think, deliberate, and then you blink and they've crossed 10 meters in the time it took your eye to track. They wore the guards' formal proving armor, black and deep red, close-fitted, functional, nothing decorative except the rank markers at the shoulders and the single indigo stripe on each helmet's crest. They stood in formation along one arc of the circle. 12 of them. The audience fell quiet. Kale walked in. He was wearing what he'd worn all day, the diplomatic gray of the Union mission staff. No modifications, no added protection. Someone in our group had apparently tried to get him at least a padded underlayer, and he had declined. He looked around the circle when he walked in. Not quickly, not nervously. He actually took his time, looking at the walls, at the crowd, at the carved arch inscription. As if he was orienting himself, the way you do when you walk into a room you want to remember. Then he looked at the guard. And then he did something that I have since learned from Sewell, from Guard Commander Velthrin's eventual testimony, from the 6 Velkathari cultural historians who have spent the post-incident period analyzing every sensor recording frame by frame, is the first thing that should have told us all exactly what we were about to witness. He bowed. Not the diplomatic half-bow that Union staff are trained to give to Velkathari of equivalent standing. A real bow, full, deep, the kind of bow that communicates, "I see you, I recognize what you are, I am not dismissing you." The court audience made a sound. A collective, unified sound that Sewell, at my elbow, translated as the Velkathari equivalent of, "There isn't a single word in standard." It is the sound of a crowd recognizing something they did not expect to recognize. Guard Commander Velthrin from across the circle was very still. Kale straightened. He looked at the guard again. He smiled. That same smile. The bioluminescence in the audience shifted, subtle and collective, like a tide. I am going to try to describe what happened in the proving circle as accurately as I can. I am a documentarian, not a combat analyst. Breath has filed a separate technical assessment that goes into considerably more detail about technique, position, and mechanics. What I can offer is what I saw and what I felt while I was seeing it. The first guard member, Velkara, as Velthrain noted in testimony, stepped into the circle. She was extraordinary. Even to a non-combat specialist eye, it was immediately apparent. She moved like water, like something that has been trained so long it has forgotten how to be tense. She carried no weapon for the first round. The proving protocol began unarmed. Kale watched her approach. He watched her the way he'd watched the memorial carvings, with that specific attentiveness that isn't calculation, it's something prior to calculation. Just seeing, taking in, present. She came at him. I am not a fight describer. I don't have Breath's vocabulary for it. What I can say is that for approximately 4 seconds, it looked exactly as bad as I'd been afraid it would. She was faster than I'd expected, faster than someone her size had any right to be, and she was absolutely precise, every movement purposeful. She threw a sequence of 3 strikes that Breath later identified as a Velkathari technique called the Kethmora, the 3 rivers, which is designed to test 3 different response vectors simultaneously. Kale moved. And here is where my vocabulary fails me a little, because what he did was not dodging in any sense I'd previously understood. He didn't avoid. He redirected. He was inside her reach before I'd tracked how he got there, and there was a moment, just a moment, where she was extended and he was not, and his hands were on her primary arm in a grip I couldn't parse, and then she was on the floor. Not injured, but on the floor definitely. The circle was absolutely silent. Velkara looked up at him from the floor. He had stepped back. He was not standing over her. He had given her space. She got up. She looked at him. And she did something that Velthrain later told me, with an expression I can only describe as complicated respect, that no Velkathari guard member had ever done in a Kethveral proving before. She bowed. 9th testimony, Velkara, 2nd Blade, Obsidian Court Guard. Recorded 4 cycles post-incident. Location, Obsidian Court Guard Barracks. He is the first opponent I have faced who I could not read. I want to explain what I mean, because unreadable sounds like a limitation, and I do not mean it that way. In 14 years of training and 6 years of active guard service, I have faced many opponents. The Velkathari combat tradition trains you to read a being before you engage them, their weight distribution, their breath pattern, the specific quality of their attention. Every being who prepares to fight communicates something about how they will fight, if you know how to listen. Kale Rourke was not communicating, not in those channels. He was perfectly still, not tense still, the way a being gets when they are trying to control fear, genuinely still. The quality that Velthrain had told us about in briefing, the Velthrin, but in a form I had only ever seen in Velkathari, never in a being from another species. I use the Kethmora because it is our most effective assessment technique. It does not need to land to be useful. It tells me how an opponent responds to simultaneous pressure, and that tells me everything about their training and their instinct. What I learned from the Kethmora is that this human's instinct is not to defend himself. His instinct is to be somewhere else entirely. I do not know how to explain this more precisely. He did not block my strikes. He was not there when they arrived. And then he was inside my extension, genuinely inside, in a position that should not have been reachable in that time frame. And his grip on my primary arm was exactly, with uncanny precision, at the 2 points of maximum leverage that even most Velkathari combat specialists take years to learn. I went down. I am not ashamed of this. I am a professional and the record should be accurate. What I want to note for the record is what he did in that moment. He had me, completely, In that position, with that grip, he had the leverage to keep me down, to pin me, to end the bout definitively and move to the next guard member. He let go. He stepped back. He gave me space to stand. This is not what an opponent does in a HFY proving. The proving has no rule against maintaining advantage. It is expected. I was trained to expect it. He let me up. He looked at me when I stood, not with satisfaction, not with pity, which would have been insulting, with "I want to be precise about this because the word matters" regard, the specific regard you give something you respect. I bowed because it was the only response that fit. He had not won because he was stronger. He was not stronger. He won because he was something that 14 years of the Guard Academy had never produced a category for. I went back to the arc and I stood with my guard and I watched. By the time the third guard member went down, I knew. By the fifth, I think Velthrin knew. By the eighth, the crowd knew. And the bioluminescence in those walls, those hundreds of watching Velkathari who had come to see their guard perform, had shifted into a pattern I had seen only in historical archive footage. The pattern called Velkithorin, which means, as precisely as the language will allow, witnessing something once in a generation. Part 5, The Reckoning. 10th Testimony, Lieutenant Commander Esha Breath, continuing. Okay, I am going to be technical for a few minutes, because I need to put something on the record that isn't available from the other testimonies. What Kale was doing in that circle was not a style of combat I recognized. I have 3 Union combat specializations. I have trained in 4 formal martial disciplines plus 2 additional specialist programs. I know what Velkathari combat technique looks like. I had studied the guard files for 2 solid cycles. I have seen footage of every major human combat tradition, military and otherwise. What Kale was doing didn't fit any of it cleanly. It was partially judo, the human earth martial art built on leverage and redirection, where you use an opponent's mass and momentum against them. It was partially something else, something that had less to do with technique and more to do with timing. This uncanny, infuriating, absolutely precise timing where he was never where the attack was, and was always exactly where the leverage was. And it was partially, I don't have a better word for this, patience. Not passive patience, active. The patience of someone who is not hurrying, because they know exactly how much time they have, and they refuse to waste it on anything that isn't necessary. He hurt no one. This is what I keep coming back to in my technical assessment, and it's what makes it complicated to categorize. He took down 12 Velkathari guard warriors, beings between 2.6 and 3.2 meters tall, with 14 years of elite combat training and 4 times his mass in some cases, and he did not hurt any of them. Every takedown was clean. Every pin, every redirect, every leverage point was chosen specifically for maximum control with minimum damage. This is extraordinarily difficult to do against opponent you physically match. Against opponents who significantly outsize you, it is nearly impossible. I have been in combat. I know what adrenaline does. I know what it does to precision. I know what it does to the careful, compassionate calculation of how much force is enough and how much is too much. His hands never shook. I watched the sensor footage afterward, frame by frame. His hands never shook. This is the thing I need people to understand. This is the thing I couldn't have told you before I watched it happen, because I wouldn't have believed it myself. He wasn't fighting the guard. He was having a conversation with them, in the only language the proving circle allowed. And what he was saying in that language was, I see you, I respect you, and I am still going to be here when this is over. 11th Testimony, Archivist Thessaly Orvin continuing. By the 10th guard member, the crowd was no longer making sound. Not the silence of an uninterested crowd. The opposite, the absolute, total silence of a crowd that is holding its breath. of 400 beings who have stopped existing in their own bodies for a moment and are entirely present to the thing happening in the circle below them. I looked at the Empress. From my observation tier I could see her clearly. She had not moved since the proving began. She was still seated on the temporary dais they'd installed at the circle's edge for the Kethvarel, elevated, as always, giving her the sight lines appropriate to the throne. Her bioluminescence had been building since the second guard member. By the 10th, it was something I had no reference for. I had read every cultural briefing file we had on Velkathari bioluminescence. I had a standard reference guide that cataloged 83 documented patterns. I was looking at something that wasn't in the guide. Sewell at my elbow made a very soft sound. I looked at them. "What is that?" I asked, keeping my voice low. Sewell's ears were high, sustained elevation, which for a Drenathi indicates a state of complex emotional experience. "The guide does not have a name for it," they said. "The guide is designed for documented patterns." "What do you think it means?" A pause. "I think," Sewell said carefully, "it means we have somewhat underestimated the nature of this situation." The 11th guard member went down. 12th testimony, Guard Commander Velthrain continuing. I stepped into the circle when the 11th was done. I want to be clear. I was not there to test him anymore. By the time I stepped in, I knew exactly what he was. I had known, if I am honest with myself, and the record demands honesty, since the third bout. Since I watched him take down Velmora, who is our most powerful close-contact fighter, using nothing but leverage and timing, and something I cannot put a name to that is not a technique at all. I was there because the Kethvarel requires all 12. And because I am first sword. And because there is a specific obligation that comes with being first sword that does not permit you to simply stand aside from something historical, because it would be easier to not be part of it. I faced him in the center of the circle. He looked at me. I looked at him. For a moment, and this is in the censor record, this can be verified, we simply looked at each other. Perhaps 5 seconds, perhaps 10. And then I bowed. I bowed before the bout began. I have never done this in my 9 years as first sword. He returned the bow, deeper than mine. The crowd made a sound that I do not have words for, even in high tongue. We fought. I will not describe it in detail. The censor record exists. What I will say is that it lasted longer than any of the others. Not because I was holding back, I was not holding back. I brought everything I had. 9 years of first sword, 14 years of academy before that, and every instinct I possess. He was better. Not in every dimension. He was not stronger. He was not faster by any measure of pure speed. He was not larger, obviously. But he was better. He was better because he was not trying to win. He was trying to have the conversation. He was trying to find the place where the leverage was, where the minimum force would achieve the maximum result, where the resolution lived on the other side of the conflict. And I am trained, we are all trained to fight, to dominate, to win. And fighting a being who is not trying to win against you, but is simply resolving, is one of the most disorienting experiences I have ever had. I went down in the end the way all the others went down, cleanly, without pain, with a precision that was, objectively, more technically demanding to achieve than simply hurting me would have been. I lay there for a moment. He stepped back. He gave me space. I stood. I looked at him. "What are you?" I asked. In High Velkathari, which he does not speak. And he smiled, that small smile. And I understood, in that moment, that the answer was something that would take a much longer conversation to contain. I turned to the Empress. "The Kethvarel is satisfied," I said, "all 12. The circle erupted. Part 6, what came after? 13th testimony, Archivist Thessaly Orvin continuing. The sound those 400 Velcathari made when Velthrin spoke is not something I can put into a document adequately. I've tried 4 times. Every draft fails it. It was not a cheer. It was bigger than a cheer. It was the sound of a culture that has spent 4,000 years looking for something specific, a particular quality in the beings it encounters, and not finding it in anything outside itself. And then, in a proving circle on an amber sky world at the edge of galactic union space, in a 31-year-old human from a rainy coastal city, finding it. I was taking notes. That is my job. I was taking notes with hands that were not entirely steady for the first time in 16 years of professional documentation. Kale was standing in the center of the circle. Alone in it, the guard had reformed along the opposite arc, and the space between them had the particular quality of a thing that has just resolved. He was breathing a little harder than he'd been when he walked in. His hair had completely lost its argument with gravity. There was a small scrape on his left arm from the 5th bout that he hadn't mentioned to anyone. He was looking up at the Empress. The Empress was looking down at him. The bioluminescence in her skin was, I will use Sewell's word, because Sewell found it before I did, luminous. Not the pattern from the guide, not any of the 83 documented. Something that Sewell said, quietly, in my ear, that the ancient texts described but that had not been observed in any documentation from the last 800 years. The Velthis-Cathari. The light of the meeting. The pattern that, in the oldest Velcathari cultural texts, indicates the recognition of a Velthrin that matches your own. She descended from the dais. This was not protocol. The Empress does not descend during formal proceedings. The Empress is approached, never approaching. This is law, tradition, written in the foundations of the court. She walked across the circle. The crowd did not make a sound. She stopped before him. She had to look down, a long way down, from 3.2 meters to 1.8. And she did, but she did it the way you look down at something you are not diminishing but approaching. He looked up at her the same way. You are not what I expected, she said. I know, he said. What are you? A person who's very bad at losing, he said. She was silent for a long moment. That is, she said, and the court herald's translation caught just a thread of something behind the formal register, something warmer, something that was not the Empress speaking but the person inside the Empress, not the worst thing to be. I don't think so either, he said. She looked at him. He looked at her. And then, in front of 400 of her court, in the proving circle of the Obsidian Court, Empress Velarin Thascori of 22 star systems extended her primary right hand. An offer of Velcathrin, the hand clasping, the physical acknowledgement of Velthrin recognized. It is offered, in Velcathari tradition, between equals. It had never, in recorded Velcathari history, been offered to a non-Velcathari. Kale looked at her extended hand. He looked up at her face. He took her hand. 14th Testimony, Counselor Frendasso, Chief Diplomatic Delegate, Galactic Union Mission. Recorded 7 cycles post-incident. Location, Mobile Station Heron's Reach. I am 300 years old. I have been a diplomat for 260 of those years. I have seen things that changed the shape of the galaxy, the Dranathi Integration Treaty, the Shreth Compact, the end of the Outer Fringe conflict. I have sat at the tables where history was made, and I have written the words that sealed it, and I have been doing this long enough that I have learned not to be surprised by history. What happened in that circle surprised me. But what happened in the cycle following the proving is what I want to record, because it is the part that history will need to account for properly. The Empress granted us a formal audience that evening. It was different from the 43 days of diplomatic sessions that had preceded it, different in quality, in energy, in what was actually happening in the room. Before the proving, we had been visitors making a case. After it, we were, I want to find the right word. The closest I can get is, we had become interesting. Empress Velarin Thascori negotiated the Velkathari integration framework with us in 11 sessions over the following 4 cycles. It was the fastest major alliance negotiation the Galactic Union has conducted with a sovereign species in its history. It was also, and I say this as someone who has been in a great many negotiations, the most unusual, because the Empress negotiated not as a superior tolerating the Union's overtures but as a genuine party. She asked questions about how the Union handled military coordination. She asked about the species composition of the Union Council. She asked about the VETH threat assessment data that had been, until that session, classified at a level that didn't technically allow sharing with non-member entities. She asked about Earth. She asked about humans specifically, their history, their development, their integration into the Galactic Union, the challenges of that integration, and how the Union had handled them. She asked these questions while Kale sat 4 seats to my left, included in the diplomatic delegation in an official capacity for the first time. And she asked him directly, "Your world produced this quality, this Velthrin, how?" And he said something that I have thought about every day since. He said, "We didn't. We produced a lot of the opposite, actually. We spent a very long time hurting each other and being certain we were right about things and losing things we loved because of it. I think Velthrin, if that's what it is, comes from the other side of that, from surviving it, from deciding that what you can hold onto matters more than what you can take." The Empress was very still. "That is an expensive education," she said. "Yes," he said. A pause. "But you kept it," she said. He looked at her. "We're trying to," he said. The Velthis was in her bioluminescence again. Sewell was making very careful notes. I was attempting to remain professionally composed while watching, in real time, the most unlikely diplomatic breakthrough in Union history unfold, because a 31-year-old human from Galway had said, "All right," and smiled.